Coming up, Snow Report SA shows more low-level snowfall is possible across parts of South Africa and Lesotho from Wednesday and into the weekend. Teenagers from around the country say South Africa's leaders are failing to uphold the values of the late Nelson Mandela. And the South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee is set to make its next interest rate decision this Thursday. Good afternoon. We're coming to you live from our Johannesburg studios here in Auckland Park. Welcome to the week ahead. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalang. We start here this hour. There could be more snow on the weather front for next week. That's according to Snow Report South Africa. Now, last week, parts of the country woke to a cold weather and light snowfalls as a cut-off low swept through the country. Now, despite the freezing weather, some were static and ventured outdoors to take photos as well as videos. Now, for a forecast of the coming week, we're now joined in studio by SABC meteorologist Mpumelelo Manyati. Mpumelelo, good afternoon and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. So there's this big forecast that we possibly could have snow again. Is this true?
Yes, it is true, but the South African Weather Service hasn't actually issued a warning or an alert for snow because it's still a bit premature, but as the time gets closer, I'm sure there will be one.
So one would possibly say that as professionals, you guys are circumspect. You don't want to tell us definitively now at this point. Is a bit far ahead, like you say.
Yes.
But if we were to look at the predictions, would it be snow in Gauteng or which provinces?
So we're not looking at Gauteng, unfortunately for the people who live in Gauteng, but we are looking at the high-lying areas in the Eastern Cape, going along that Drakensberg area into KwaZulu-Natal and possibly in Mpumalanga and the southern part, the extreme rather southern part of the Free State.
And then with the snow from last week, it seems to have caught everybody by surprise.
Yes.
Why exactly was this? Why was it not predicted?
So it's pretty tricky to forecast snow in the interior of the country, especially since we don't have any mountainous areas. The highest mountains that we have are along the coastal provinces, which is that Drakensberg. So there they have winter, they have snow every single winter. But in inland, it's in the interior of the country, we tend to be cautious a bit when it comes to forecasting snow because there's a lot of business that happens there and you don't want to say that there's going to be snow and then there's no snow and then people say all we do is lie.
No, we appreciate the precautionary measures that you take insofar as your predictions, but thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Now, that is our reporter meteorologist, Mpumelelo Manyati. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the current socio-economic state of South Africa is getting the thumbs down from the adolescent population. Teenagers from around the country say South Africa's leaders are failing to uphold the values of the late Nelson Mandela. The youth who were speaking out were gathered for the sitting of the Nelson Mandela Children's Parliament in the Eastern Cape. Sidi Mamfeku quizzed them about their feelings and outlook.
Future leaders taking stock of the current situation. In their view, it's not a good one and it would have disappointed the late Nelson Mandela. They say the conditions millions of South African children are subjected to are particularly concerning. They also highlight the high levels of unemployment and poverty, which they view as a sign that government is failing the people.
I think Tata Mandela would be a bit disappointed in our officials and our leaders because we are out here as the children crying for change. We see the detriments that we are living in. Poverty, we are still a poverty-stricken country, and that should not be a case after plus or minus 30 years of democracy. We are wanting economic freedom. We want our diverse nation to unite and strive for the betterment of our country.
But the finger is not just pointed at the adult leaders. The members of the Children's Parliament say there is lack of participation by young people in political activism.
we should actually take a step back, especially as youth, and look at the activism that we are playing in our societies. Because although there is a high unemployment, and especially within the youth, but there's also very low youth activism within the youth, which is totally opposed to what Utata Nelson Mandela would want. You know, he was an activism from a very early age. At even younger than I am, he was already involved within the struggle. So,
continuing to play an active and proactive role, children speaking out against poor governance is still regarded as a vital pillar of strengthening the societal fabric of the country, a position that was advocated for by Mandela.
He desired a society that treats children with dignity and respect, and he spoke about a South Africa where children are able to speak about what they need and that they are engaged with and they listened to, and that's the approach that the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund takes.
Members of the Nelson Mandela Children's Parliament also called for the inclusion of children in policy-making processes related to child wellness. The future leaders identified sexual crimes against children, the rising rate of teenage pregnancies, and underage drinking as issues that require immediate interventions. Sidima Mfegu, SABC News, East London.
Now, meanwhile, the ANC Secretary-General Fikile Mbalula says the governing party will be announcing a number of activities to mark Mandela Day. Mbalula was addressing the media on a number of issues, including at the party's National Executive Committee meeting this morning in Johannesburg.
Nelson Mandela Month, in his political overview, the President alluded to the fact that we held this NEC meeting during the Nelson Mandela Month, dedicated internationally to the memory of our departed icon and stalwart in the struggle for liberation, whose sacrifice towards our political freedom, as well as his wisdom in leading us to democracy as a leader of the ANC, is recognized and celebrated throughout the world. The President and the NEC once more paid tribute to President Nelson Mandela and further committed ourselves as the ANC to his vision for democracy, freedom, justice, and equality, underpinned by the radical socio-economic emancipation of our people. The President reminded the National Executive Committee that it is the Constitution that enjoins us to create the new society for which many paid with their lives. It is against this backdrop that the ANC renews its commitment towards dismantling the socio-economic defaults of race, gender, and class in our society, whilst thriving for a prosperous South Africa, a better African continent, and a just and peaceful world. The ANC will announce activities as part of celebrating this icon of our liberation struggle, whose birthday this year coincides with the convening of the BRICS Plus political parties dialogue in Ekurhuleni.
All right, more news after the break. Actually, after the break, we'll be speaking to Kashua Brooks from the Nelson Mandela Foundation just to find out what they'll be doing for Nelson Mandela Day. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, tributes continue to pour in for the late Nomalungelo Bonga, who was an acclaimed traditional dancer. The 69-year-old Bonga died on the 6th of July after a short illness. The dance legend is the founder of the Sivuyile Nonzama traditional dance group and spent most of her life promoting isiXhosa culture through dance.
Nomalungelo Bonga is remembered as a woman who was a mother to all. For the most part of her life, she not only promoted the Xhosa culture, but also nurtured many young women she crossed paths with.
It is a sad time to us as the family. We have lost a mother. We have lost a sister. We have lost a friend. We have lost a supporter. We have lost a mentor to many. Umama was very kind. She was everything to us as the family and the entire nation.
Sivuyile Nonzame dance group played an important role in many historic events in the Eastern Cape. They performed at the burial of the late King Sabata Dalindyebo in 1989 and when the remains of Sarah Batman were brought back to South Africa.
And at the age of...
I joined the group at the age of 9. She taught me respect and how to dance. She also provided shelter for the homeless.
She wanted everyone to be happy. She was a parent to us. Some of us have no parents. She was playing a role of a parent. She loved everyone. She wanted everyone to live a better life. That's how kind she was.
The provincial government says Bonga's death leaves a huge void in the cultural landscape.
She led a province-wide spatial development initiative whose primary function was scouting cultural artists that can represent our province. She also led the group of artists to welcome the remains of Sarah Batman. Her Sivuyile traditional dancers was amongst the groups that participated in the reburial of the late King Sabata Dalindyebo.
The funeral service will be held at the Mthatha Stadium on Friday, the 21st of July. Sinethemba Blandile, SABC News, Mthatha.
The Freestart Arts Festival is celebrating its 23rd year of existence this year. Organizers say it's been supporting a lot of artists in the creative industry and is one of the key platforms offering a wide range of national and international works. But it also provides a vital economic boost and promotes Bloemfontein.
Initially called the Volksblad Kunstefees, the 5-day-long affair is now referred to as the Freestart Arts Festival. The event dates back to 2001, and this year's festival also did not disappoint. Tending the hiccup caused by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 and 2021, organizers hope for a revival.
COVID was a widespread disaster for everyone, but I do believe that with the new strategy of the festival, really containing the festival on the beautiful Bloemfontein campus of the University of the Free State, we've really harnessed the focus of bringing a lot of people back to theatres, back to the stalls, and that's what our strategy is. So we're just going to build from this success.
There is food galore on offer, also arts and crafts, as well as other merchandise. A light, cool wind in the middle of winter did not detract from enjoyment. All that mattered was the fun and festive atmosphere.
I like the food. The food is great. I've watched a bunch of shows, but I think my favorite was the school shows that they put for the teens.
This is my first time and I'm really enjoying it. I only came because my cousin said I should come, check it out, and it's really nice.
Oh, I think it is something that should happen every year. I think it's a great way to bring people together and for people to experience different types of arts and singing and everything they sell here. I think it's very nice.
It's not my first time here. I was here last year, and just like last year, I'm having a good time.
Young musicians are content. To them, events of this magnitude create a chance to unleash their potential.
I'm with the Saints Music Academy, so we performed here earlier today, and it was a really wonderful experience. It was nice to see the crowd get up and lively and dance with us and sing with us, and it was just a really wonderful experience to perform here.
It was nice. It was my first time. We do different genres. We do R&B, pop, indie. We have originals as well. So we come with the school, we perform with the school band.
It's an Africans-inclusive festival. People of different races, young and old, getting together and taking pleasure in the activities. And it's all happening here in the heart of Mangaung. Konelo Lekhafola, SABC News, Bloemfontein.
All right, let's shift our focus to this story now. Police have arrested 2 more people in connection with the torching of trucks, bringing the number of arrests to 5. They were arrested in Mpumalanga as well as Limpopo. Now, more than 20 trucks have been set alight in the KwaZulu-Natal, Mpumalanga, Limpopo and Freestart provinces since last week. The army has been deployed in 4 provinces to monitor the situation. At least 3 of these suspects are expected to appear in court tomorrow. The National Police spokesperson, Brigadier Atlenda Mate, says more arrests are expected. All right, more news on the other side. Do stay with us. Technology continues to change the way we live, and banking is no different. A recent report on the future of retail banking predicts that banking could become fully digital within the next 5 years. Although these changes are embraced by the youth, it might prove challenging for older generations. SABC reporter Kagiso Kaipopele and video journalist Tumelo Sitlabetsi compiled this report.
Standing in long queues at the ATM and being robbed of your hard-earned money. Some of the drawbacks of banking at the moment. This could, however, soon change as the digital banking becomes more popular. A trend the young generation is certainly embracing.
Now it's easier to bank. It's easier to get access to your bank without standing on queues at the bank, without any hassle. Digital has taken over, technology in a way has taken over the world. And we as South Africans, we need to be on that mandate as technology is moving forward in terms of banking. And as we know that there's a recent bank that has been opened in South Africa. I think it's 2 years to 3 years. It's only digital bank. It does not have a branch, and simply you can manage your money through the app.
In the next 5 years, it will be more convenient for us to use like cell phone banking and the likes of Apple Pay rather than cash, because it's more convenient. I believe that cash, it can easily get lost. You can easily forget your wallet at home. And if you're using your mobile banking options, everybody always have their phone in their hands, and it's easy to just, it's accessible. It's more convenient than having hard cash on you all the time.
Switching from traditional banking to digital banking might not be easy, but some say they are willing to learn. I will be happy if I can be taught internet banking, because nowadays life is really messed up. It's not like before. To carry cash is dangerous. You might lose it. If I was using cell phone banking, things were going to be better.
Banking
Mashabela Sitlodi is an elderly resident of the rural village Motosem Pefeni. Residents here live at slower pace, with no banks or ATMs. They are forced to travel to the northwest capital to do their business. Like Sitlodi, his friend Donald Mutate says technology can sometimes be scary, but they are willing to learn, especially since carrying cash is quite dangerous. I will be happy to use internet banking, provided that I am taught how to use it. Digital migration will only be successful if those who are not tech savvy are well educated.
You need to make sure that you keep on educating them. Develop some apps that are user-friendly for the elders, and then make sure that that app, you give some pamphlets that when they are watching television, they can start reading about the digital pamphlet that suits their needs. And it does not be complicated, it be simple and straightforward. As we know, our history in this country, most people cannot read and write, but if you simplify it for them in their language, it will become easy.
Although there might be some challenges in switching to digital banking, Doe highlights that the move will make South Africa more global competitive. Kagiso Kipopele, SABC News, Mahikeng.
To this story now, on Thursday the 20th, the Reserve Bank is expected to make its interest rate announcement. Should the interest rates increase, it will likely put more pressure on consumers. Now, for more on this, we're joined by economist Kanti. Kanti, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Now, the last hike in May of around 50 basis points really put further strain on consumers. What can we expect this week?
Well, you're quite right that there's a lot of strain on consumers because prices remain still quite high and inflation remains high. And the Reserve Bank continues to be very, very stressed about the idea of inflation. Although there's very little ability for them to continue to increase, I think one of the things that we think is very, very important is to think about what some of the things that the bank has been telling us before, which is, remember, they started saying, let's normalize interest rates. Because remember, during the time of COVID-19, interest rates were reduced quite significantly. And now they're trying to normalize them. And that normalization has been going up for some time. And there's probably, in the language of the Reserve Bank, another 50 basis points of increase in which they think that, to normalize rates, that's where we should be. But certainly, if inflation comes down, it is likely that, they may be able to put this thing on hold. So what is important is probably to hear the number that will come out also this week of inflation.
But what are you expecting, a 25 or a 50 at this point?
Likely a 25 or nothing at all, because they've pushed this quite hard. There's been but a likelihood is that probably another 25 basis points to say we are still normalizing to get to this. And the Reserve Bank governor also spoke about we are now moving to a level where actually interest rates are constraining, money supply and making sure that we are actually at the level in which economic activity is now constrained. But certainly, another hike, probably another 25 basis points, but most importantly, because there is also this very, very big challenge also of core inflation. Remember, we have headline inflation, and that's the inflation number that includes food and transport. But if you strip out food, which has been growing at around 11% the last time we saw, there's also transport costs. Strip that out, there's still this core inflation, and that is still above 1%, which would be cause for worry. So you're likely to stand at 25 basis point, maybe even 50 in terms of trying as far as possible to normalize and to constrain in terms of what the Reserve Bank government can say.
You touch on the reduction around COVID time. I mean, if we look at that period, they were so significantly reduced that a number of people were tempted to purchase property, which many of them did. It becomes the biggest conversation now that some feel they were ill-advised, that at that time, that perhaps they shouldn't have taken advantage of those lower interest rates and bought the houses because now they cannot afford. In hindsight, do you think those that advised the individuals to buy the properties were actually giving them proper advice, or really it was to many's detriment?
Look, the difficulty in the decision, whether it's a policy decision or it's a personal decision, one of the things that we've been facing, and I think one of the things we've been talking about, is that we are now in a polycrisis world, so that your decisions are not based just on one thing, right? If you are trying to you make a decision, there will be a number of factors. Perhaps at that time, it had not been evident that we would have the kinds of shocks that we've had. One of the things that has happened, of course, is the crisis in Ukraine and in Russia. We've had, the return of economic activity, certainly in the US, and some of the other issues that we are facing. And so people at the time were making the decisions that they saw at the time, and also taking advantage of the opportunities. Because, of course, low interest rates in many times, and exactly for what it was meant for. It was supposed to incite economic activity. And so when you cut interest rates, you are trying to get people to buy houses. You're trying to get people to borrow, to build houses. You're trying to get people to spend. So that's exactly why you cut interest rates.
Defeat the purpose then, Kanti. Apologies for interjecting there, but does it not defeat the purpose if at some point you're going to now lose your property? That here we are always constantly identifying those periods where the interest rates are so low, we go to purchase these properties only to lose them when we go through such a massive, significant hiking cycle.
And certainly, I think you are raising a very, very important question in which the balance out is between the time you are buying the property and you're making a decision now and then the outlook. And some of the interesting discussions about that is whether or not, when you look at your current position and then you look at the outlook, and many people say, for example, that one of the issues has been growth in income, right? because you buy a property now because you can afford it. But will you be able to afford it next year? So how does the outlook look in terms of your incomes? And unfortunately, we also find ourselves in a situation that is not normal, in the sense that usually when you are actually making such a decision, you are looking ahead and you're thinking, well, I can afford it now, but will I be able to afford it next year? And for that, you look and say, well, I know next year I'll get another maybe 6%, 7% increase. Unfortunately, the situation South Africans face now is not just of inflation, but also incomes are not growing. And so it wouldn't be fair to say that people made wrong decisions, because most people would have thought they would get an income increase, and that has not come through. And so, as I said, one of the important things is also to look at the kinds of things that shift. What is important now is perhaps a lesson, but perhaps too late, that when we are all decisions, personal decisions, finance decisions, policy decisions, require a number of maneuvering that you will need to sort of think about and say, I'm making this decision now, but what is the next year looking like? And sometimes, and as it turns out now, that many of us have been wrong about whether or not it's a good decision today, that in terms of looking at the outlook. But certainly, you are looking to important things about how we actually now about thinking about the future. And as you ask the question, what should we be looking at for this coming interest rate hike? What we are looking at is the number of things and the moving parts of both local and economic factors. And really, that's a very, very difficult thing at this point.
Well, in the presence of an expert such as yourself, perhaps we can't let you go before we ask. As ordinary citizens, what should we be doing in this period? Where should we be looking to reduce in our costs?
Look, I mean, this is a very difficult question to ask, because this is a question all economists have been asked for the past 3 years, 5 years, and we talk about tightening belts, right? And I think the belts are really, really tight. Actually, they're probably now in your better brain. But there's very little that people can do. I mean, I cannot give financial advice, but it seems that, because that is probably an important thing for South Africans and all of us to do, is to really consult with, your financial advisor, to talk to your bank, because as things get hard, we tend to sit back and wait for, things to get better. But it's very, very important to talk, to have an engagement with financial advisors, to have an engagement with your bank or your creditors in such a way that allows you to open up the space, because many people will wait until it's too late. Perhaps, an important thing is really to engage with the financial advisor about where could you actually take things out, what could you make sure that you are, and it is an important time to do that. So, while I cannot give that advice, but certainly what is important is to get really proper good advice and engage with creditors, because I think what we think is important is that you might have opportunities there to salvage some situation before things get worse. So that is probably the most important.
Now, Kanti, just before I let you go, around this time, if tomorrow this week, we get to see perhaps a 50 basis points increase, the conversation ever so often is one that moves to then perhaps looking at the mandate of the Reserve Bank. It's a constant conversation that perhaps we cannot continue to just target inflation. Where do you stand on this whole debate?
The inflation targeting is a very, very important one, because as we all know, I think the Minister of Finance talks about this all the time, that it's really important that there are trade-offs all the time. So when we think about it now, we think about targeting inflation. But the Europeans, for example, talked about this during the global financial crisis, in which you hold interest rates perhaps, you accept inflation, and then you say, but the reforms, because we are now also in a very, very important and crucial stage of economic reforms. Can those reforms take root in this environment that we're in? And so the difficulty now is really to see whether or not, not so much the inflation targeting itself, but perhaps the way it is implemented might be important, because one of the key and critical things that we have to look at is this whole balance, the trade-offs that we are taking on. The governor said very recently in a TV show, on a radio show, when he was asked, is this not too blunt an instrument? And he answered, well, are there other instruments that he can use?
Yes, I listened to that interview.
Only one. Yeah, he only has one. Is there another one, perhaps that is sharper, that he can use? And that's certainly true. But it's very difficult to make that decision now about a blunt or a sharper instrument, because where we are now is what is got to work with, and it will take some time to change that. But how do you implement it? And one of the big considerations now, even if you think about, for example, food inflation, that what we want is people to invest, to be able to, to grow the food, to ease the pressure on food prices. And so is this the right time to keep interest rates? And actually, are we not reinforcing some of the inflationary pressures that we've faced? So policymaking is very difficult, but perhaps the question is not so much whether we change the tool, but whether we reimagine or rethink the way in which we've been implementing policy as it exists. And
but I remember
that's the big question.
I remember with that particular interview, he summarized it basically to say that we have to cope with the tough times if we want better times. That was basically where he stood. So meaning if the tough times are required even this time around come Thursday, he most certainly will not be somebody who budges. If it's 50 basis, it will be 50. But thank you very much, Kanti, for your time this afternoon. That's economist Kanti Pai speaking to us. To this story now, road infrastructure remains a challenge for most rural parts of the Eastern Cape. The residents of Mzoboche outside Kumbu have accused the Mhlonto local municipality of neglecting them. They say the road they use to access shops, healthcare facilities and other government services have not been repaired since 2005. Mzoboche is one of the 4 villages that were under the Libode base in Nyandeni local municipality. Now, through the demarcation board, the village was moved to Mhlonte local municipality in 2005. The residents say since then they've not seen any development. SABC reporter Lwandile Mbulali has more on the story.
This road was last gravelled over 18 years ago. The nearly 20-kilometer stretch is a lifeline for Mzoboche villagers. But during rainy days, they are unable to access healthcare facilities, shops and schools.
Xa kugula umuntu siye sifuna amadoda athwale ngebhedi abochelelwe asiwe
When someone is sick, men use a mattress to carry that person to a nearby village. Recently, a person died. We can't call ambulances. Only the police attend to issues in this village because they have big cars. Ambulances do not come here. Even a mobile clinic that used to come here stopped because of this road.
They don't care about this community. Many people have been injured and it's very hard for children when they need to go to school. It's very bad and there is no development. Our clinic is in town. Sometimes you miss your date and end up defaulting on treatment.
The residents say the Mhlonto local municipality has ignored their plight for nearly 2 decades.
We were under the Nyandeni municipality. Through the demarcation board, we were placed here in Mhlonto. They were acting like we will be taken care of, but we are not. If you can go around this village, you'll find water pipes, but we don't even have water. There is minimal development in this place.
The Mhlonto local municipality says it's going to prioritize this road.
As the municipality, we have already appointed a panel of contractors that is going to attend to many roads of that nature across Mhlonto. And the Ward Council of Ward 13 have appointed that particular road to be the priority, in fact, as we are completing another road from another area which was bad, like that one. We are heading straight to that particular village.
The residents are calling on government to fast-track the construction of their road as taxi operators refuse to operate in their area and scores of learners are without scholar transport. Lwandile Mbulali, Kumbu in the Eastern Cape.
All right, more news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. The Nelson Mandela Official Nelson Mandela Day was officially declared by the United Nations in November of 2009 and was first observed back in the 18th of July 2010. This year, the Nelson Mandela Foundation will commemorate the day by taking part in planting trees. Joining us for more on this is Head of Outreach Programs, Gashwal Brooks. Gashwal, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. Let's start with this year's Mandela Day theme. It's in your hands. Just unpack this theme for us.
Good afternoon and good afternoon to everyone watching right now. Yes, indeed. Look, I think that we need to start off by saying that our board has a specific focus on two major concerns, and that is dealing with the issues of poverty as well as inequality. And what we find is that global climate change, along with, or rather global climate change has definitely accelerated food insecurity. Just by way of an example, I'm sure that everyone watching this right now would be able to attest to the fact that inflation is very serious and that it's hit people's pockets extremely hard. But food is double the average inflation rate than what everything else is. So already we're seeing that food is a rare commodity. It's an expensive commodity, and this is of course exacerbated by global climate change. So on that very basis, we feel that we need to work with community, or rather with communities, to enable them to be able to plant their own food while simultaneously take action against climate change, or negative climate change in this instance, through tree planting.
So just perhaps to give us a bigger picture, we know that it's 14 years since we started to observe Mandela Day, but are you seeing perhaps in your observations that since then, are we seeing a number of people joining in, or we're seeing a decrease because of the challenges that many face now, where they would be more inward looking and not necessarily willing to share or give of themselves to others?
Well, that's exactly what we want to reverse, to be quite honest. I think that there has been a very inward looking, and that is really largely to do with, I think, the COVID-19 pandemic definitely had a huge impact on that very notion. Where, I mean, as you're well aware, people lost their jobs, people lost businesses, people lost incomes. And as a result, and obviously there was also the health factor added to that, let alone the mental health element added to that. So what it left people with ultimately was the sense of looking after myself before I care about the rest of my community. But the fact of the matter ultimately is that this year we want to reignite the global imagination around Nelson Mandela Day. And the amazing thing is the number of countries that have come on board. I have, as far east as China, received word that, at various consulates, at various offices, we will be seeing tree planting activities throughout the African continent, many parts of Europe, the Americas. So I believe, and I can see, that the global imagination around Mandela Day has definitely been reignited.
And then locally, our government, what are some of the initiatives, or which are some of the initiatives that you guys will be partnering with them? Because I read a statement that fisheries and forestry will actually be just on the ground on Mandela Day.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have a large number of stakeholders cutting across from civil society to business, to individuals, to government, of course. And I think that for us, the key element here is to make sure that everyone participates on the day. It's, as I mentioned from the onset, it's not about us doing things on behalf of. I think traditionally that is how people see and used to see Mandela Day, where we go out and we do acts of charity on a particular day. Much rather, we have a much more long-term and sustainable approach, hence why we're working with communities and dealing with issues like climate change as well as food security. And quite frankly, what you need in that particular instance is all hands on deck. Everyone needs to participate, from community level all the way through to governmental level. So we have a large number of governmental partners, ranging at national, provincial, as well as local level. And of course, as I mentioned, business, civil society, faith-based communities, and members of communities that aren't necessarily affiliated to particular groups.
All right, Gashwal, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was the Nelson Mandela Foundation's Gashwal Brooks speaking to us. Now, today marks 60 years since the late Mama Miriam Makeba gave a speech at the United Nations Special Committee on Apartheid. Joining us for a discussion on this is Sip Mantuli, researcher at Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Relations Affairs. But let's first play you this speech.
Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, recently I had the honor of being present at the Addis Ababa Conference of the Heads of African States, an event which made a deep impression on me and which underlined the serious and determined manner in which the African people view the problem facing them. One of these problems is undoubtedly the question of the serious situation developing in my country, South Africa. Every member of this committee knows by now what apartheid means to the Africans. I do not have to explain in detail what is going on there. The members of the committee also know that every time we tried to better the situation, the Verwoerd government went further to make South Africa a nightmare to the Africans through police brutality and government terrorism. The story of the shootings at Sharpeville is well known throughout the world. Indeed, all men and women of goodwill all over the world raised their voices in anger on that occasion, but all these protests just fell on deaf ears. Since Sharpeville, many terrible things have occurred in my country. Our political parties were declared illegal, and the leaders were forced to go underground or go into exile to continue the fight from outside and appeal for support from the world. However, since the South African freedom fighters started making representation to the United Nations for the removal of the Verwoerd government and the restoration of power to those to whom it belongs, we have received nothing more than lip service. I have already stated that you and the committee know that the political situation in my country is tense and is even growing more tense. This, therefore, does not leave us with any option but to ask the United Nations to take positive action against the South African government.
Okay, we're now joined by our guest, Sipho. Sipho, I'm sure you've just heard that particular speech. So many years, very powerful. What impact did the laying bare of South Africa's atrocities under apartheid actually, or what impact did they contribute to where we are now?
Greetings, my sister, and Jumbo Africa to your viewers. A very important historical statement and a political testament, by the way, that was given by our cultural ambassador, Miriam Makeba. Relevancy is very important in the context, looking at coming back from Sharpeville Langa massacre, but also looking at arrest of political prisoners. Very important if one has to look that Miriam Makeba, Dr. Zenzile Miriam Makeba, had to sacrifice her career as a musician, first of all, her dignity also. Remember, after this speech, she had to pay the price of her citizenship being revoked by the then apartheid South Africa. So that's why when you look at the context of Mama Miriam Zenzile Makeba, it is very important, timely in the global affairs, timely in the continental affairs of the African continent, to look at the role of leadership also, to look also at the global atrocities that we are seeing, the conflicts that are happening in Sudan, in the Eastern Congo, in Somalia. So all these conflicts, we are able to use what I call the power of cultural power, the power relations that comes from culture.
Most certainly. We do know among some of the impacts, or at least how she was affected personally, was that after that speech, her citizenship was revoked by the then government of the day. So most certainly she suffered immensely as a result of her bold stance.
Definitely, and the double jeopardy further, we can say her relation with Stokely Carmichael Kwame was also another push and a pull factor. And also remember that she was also even reconciling with many young people who came, who were coming out of the Shavilanga massacre, going exile. And also we know further that he did not appear once before the United Nations General Assembly. She actually appeared twice between 1963 and 1964. But these 6 decades to our viewers is very important when you look at the context that it was in July and only in May she was also in Addis Ababa 60 years ago also. So one can contextualize the visit of Mama Africa being very important that it
All right, we seem to have unfortunately lost Sipho there. A very important conversation we were having. I understand that we have re-established the link to my guest, Sipho, if you're there. My next question was just around the role of artists in perhaps shining the spotlight on some of the atrocities across the globe. Looking now, do we see a number of artists willing to put themselves out there and just be in that vulnerable position of standing for whatever cause?
Ambassadors, cultural artists in Africa, in South Africa, Miriam Makeba becomes that epitome. So if you have to epitomize the role of Miriam Makeba, there are some young artists who are coming up from your Simpiwe Dana, from your Thandiswa Mazwai, who are giving that impetus messaging of Miriam Makeba. And you will recall again that just recently, Simpiwe Dana was in Guinea-Conakry. Where her daughter is resting there in Guinea-Conakry. So it is important to look at the role of artists, so safeguard their welfare, their living conditions, even most what I called our senior artists, what you called.
All right. Unfortunately, it seems we really cannot get a good line there, but that was a very important conversation we're having there with Sipho Mantulu as we just mark or observe 60 years since that very, very powerful speech by Miriam Makeba. Let's take it to this story now. The Zimbabwe President Emmerson Mnangagwa has warned Western countries not to meddle in the coming elections in that country. Mnangagwa made the call on the same day he signed into law the controversial Patriotic Bill, which is receiving widespread criticism from activists and political commentators alike. He was speaking during the commissioning of the new look, the $153 million Chinese-built Robert Mugabe International Airport.
This is the heavily contested elections post the Robert Mugabe era. The governing party's ZANU-PF presidential candidate is under immense pressure. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has used his campaign trail to send a stern warning ahead of the elections.
We will not, as the people of Zimbabwe, we will not allow the Western countries to dictate to us. We don't dictate to them. This interference from outside is unacceptable. We as a sovereign state and a member of the United Nations, we have a sovereign right to run our elections uninterfered. Those countries who want to observe must restrict themselves to the role of observing our elections, not to interfere in that process. We will not accept it. After all, they have elections full of fault in their own places.
Many Zimbabweans have left the country due to economic and unpredictable political environment.
The earlier they remove these sanctions, the earlier they will be comfortable in their own consciences. Because against these sanctions, we continue to grow. Our economy for the past 3 years has been growing above 5%, and the leading growing economy in the region in spite of nefarious sanctions imposed on our economy and our country.
All eyes will be on Zimbabwe next month as it decides on who will lead the country in the next 5 years. Kylie Kumalo, SABC News.
All right, and that's where I leave it for today. We're back next week. Enjoy your afternoon further.